Pack your things and leave immediately. Don't tell your daughter. Those words. God, those words still echo in my mind every single night. The plumber's voice cracked like glass when he said them, as if every syllable was cutting his throat on the way out. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold his toolbox and his eyes. Jesus Christ, his eyes were wide with something that went beyond fear. It was terror. Pure, unadulterated terror. He wouldn't even look at me when he whispered those next words, the ones that changed everything. Please, ma'am, whatever you do, don't go down to that basement alone. My heart started hammering against my ribs like a caged animal trying to break free. At first, I thought he was joking. I actually laughed. A nervous, pathetic little laugh that died in my throat when I saw the color drain from his face like someone had pulled a plug. He looked like he'd seen death itself lurking in the shadows of my basement. I turned toward that basement door, that innocent wooden door I'd walked past 1,000 times, and that's when I smelled it. Something that didn't belong in my house. Not gas. Not the usual dampness that old houses carry in their bones. Something else. Something that made my stomach twist into knots and my knees go weak like I was about to collapse. My daughter wasn't who I thought she was. And if this already gives you chills, pause and hit the like button, subscribe to Elderly Stories, and comment where you're watching from, because what I saw in that basement, it changed my life forever. It destroyed everything I thought I knew about love, about family, about the person I brought into this world with my own blood and tears. But let me start from the beginning, from that peaceful morning when I still believed in the goodness of my own child. It was one of those perfect spring mornings that make you grateful to be alive. The coffee was steaming in my favorite mug, the one with the little chip on the handle that I'd been meaning to throw away for years, but could never bring myself to part with. Birds were singing outside my kitchen window, their voices weaving through the morning air like a symphony of hope. Sunlight was streaming through the gauze curtains, touching the family photos on the mantel with golden fingers, making them glow like precious memories preserved in amber. Sarah had moved back home just 3 months earlier, after her divorce from that worthless husband who couldn't keep his hands to himself or his mouth shut about other women. My heart had broken for her when she showed up at my door with 2 suitcases and eyes red from crying, but I'd be lying if I said part of me wasn't grateful. After years of rattling around in this big house alone, after years of silence so thick you could cut it with a knife, the sound of another person breathing, moving, existing in these rooms made me feel alive again. It felt good to have someone in the house again. After years of eating dinner alone while watching the evening news, after years of talking to myself just to hear a human voice, having Sarah there made the house feel like a home again instead of a mausoleum for memories. We'd sit at the kitchen table in the mornings, sharing coffee and small talk about the weather, her job search, the neighbors. Normal things. Safe things. The kinds of conversations that bind families together with invisible threads of shared experience. She was such a good daughter, always had been. Quiet, thoughtful, considerate. She'd make me tea when I had headaches, bring me soup when I felt under the weather, sit with me during my favorite television shows even when I knew she was bored out of her mind. After the chaos of her marriage, she seemed to find peace in our simple routine. She'd smile at me over her coffee cup, that same sweet smile she'd had as a little girl, and tell me how grateful she was to be home. But there was one small thing, one tiny moment that should have been a warning bell clanging in my head like a fire alarm. The day after she moved in, I found her quietly installing a new lock on the basement door. When I asked her about it, she looked up at me with those innocent eyes and said, "It's just for safety, Mom. It's just clutter down there anyway. Old paint cans and Christmas decorations and junk we never use. This way we don't have to worry about anyone getting hurt if they accidentally fall down those stairs." It made sense. Perfect sense. Those stairs were steep and the lighting was poor, and Lord knows I'd stumbled down them myself more than once over the years. Sarah was just being practical, just taking care of her old mother the way a good daughter should. So I smiled and thanked her for thinking of my safety, never once questioning why she was the only one with the key. God, how could I have been so blind? How could I have missed the calculation in her eyes, the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking, like she was studying me, measuring me, waiting for something. The first real sign that something was wrong came 3 weeks later. That damned faucet in the upstairs bathroom started leaking again. It had been acting up for months, dripping constantly, driving me half crazy with its steady rhythm in the middle of the night. Drip, drip, drip. Like water torture, each drop a reminder that the house was getting old, that everything was falling apart around me. I reached for the phone to call Harold Mackenzie, the plumber who'd been fixing things in this house for the better part of 20 years. Harold knew every pipe, every joint, every quirk of this old place's plumbing system. He was reliable, honest, and he charged fair prices for good work. But Sarah stopped me before I could dial. "Don't call Harold, Mom," she said, her hand covering mine on the phone. "I know someone better. A friend of mine from work recommended this guy. He's cheaper, faster, more reliable than Harold. Plus, Harold's getting on in years. Isn't it time to try someone new?" Her voice trembled when she said it. Just slightly, just enough that a mother's ear might catch it and wonder why. But I dismissed it as nervousness about the expense. Money had been tight since her divorce, and she was probably embarrassed about not being able to contribute much to the household expenses. "If you think it's best, sweetheart," I said, squeezing her hand. "You know I trust your judgment." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Not quite. There was something else there, something that flickered across her face too quickly for me to catch and examine. Relief? Satisfaction? I couldn't tell, and I didn't try to look deeper. I should have. God help me, I should have. That night, lying in bed, I listened to that rhythmic dripping sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't just the bathroom faucet anymore. It was deeper, more resonant, like water moving through hidden spaces behind the walls. The sound kept me awake, a steady percussion that seemed to match the rhythm of my heartbeat, until I couldn't tell where the house ended and I began. I thought it was just old pipes settling, the way old houses complain in the night. Metal expanding and contracting, joints working loose after decades of faithful service. Nothing unusual. Nothing threatening. Just the natural sounds of aging infrastructure that every homeowner learns to live with. But sometimes, in those dark hours before dawn when the mind plays tricks and shadows take on lives of their own, I could swear I heard something else underneath that dripping. Something mechanical. Something deliberate. Something that definitely didn't belong in the quiet of a suburban night. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that grief and loneliness and the stress of having my routine disrupted were making me hear things that weren't there. After all, what did I know about plumbing? Harold had always handled the technical stuff while I worried about the bills. Maybe new plumbing systems just sounded different. Maybe I was just getting old and jumpy. 3 days later, the plumber Sarah had recommended showed up at my door. He was ordinary in every way that mattered. Mid-50s, soft-spoken, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of decades spent working with tools and pipes and the hidden guts of other people's homes. His name was Frank DeLuca, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen every possible plumbing disaster and lived to tell about it. "Mrs. Morrison? I'm here about the leak," he said, tipping his baseball cap politely. "Of course, come in," I replied, leading him toward the stairs. "It's the bathroom faucet on the second floor. It's been dripping for weeks now, driving me absolutely crazy." Frank nodded and followed me upstairs, his heavy work boots creating a comforting rhythm on the wooden steps. He examined the faucet with professional efficiency, testing the handles, checking the connections, running his fingers along the pipes with the practiced touch of an expert diagnostician. "I can fix this easy enough," he said after a few minutes. "But I should check your main water line too, just to make sure there aren't any other issues developing. Mind if I take a look at your basement?" That's when everything changed. I led him to the basement door, fishing in my purse for the spare key Sarah had given me. My hands were steady, my heart calm. I had no reason to expect anything other than a routine inspection of an old house's plumbing system. "The stairs are a bit steep," I warned him as I unlocked the door. "And the lighting isn't great. My daughter just installed this new lock for safety." Frank nodded and clicked on his flashlight before disappearing down into the darkness below. I stayed at the top of the stairs, listening to his footsteps moving across the concrete floor, the beam of his light dancing through the shadows like a firefly in a cave. At first, everything sounded normal. The soft shuffle of work boots, the clink of tools, the occasional grunt of effort as he examined pipes and connections. Routine sounds. Professional sounds. The kinds of noises you'd expect from a competent tradesman doing his job. And then, silence. Complete, absolute silence that stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. No footsteps. No tool sounds. No muttered observations or professional commentary. Just an emptiness that seemed to swallow sound itself, leaving only the beating of my own heart and the whisper of my own breathing. "Frank," I called down the stairs. "Everything okay down there?" No answer. "Frank? Did you find the problem?" Still nothing. I was starting to get worried when I finally heard his footsteps again, but they were different now. Slower. Unsteady. Like someone walking through deep water or carrying an enormous weight. When he finally emerged from the basement, climbing those steep stairs one careful step at a time, his face was the color of old parchment. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. They darted around the room like trapped animals looking for escape routes, focusing on the floor, the walls, the ceiling, anywhere but my face. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, and it shook like autumn leaves in a strong wind. "Ma'am, you need to pack your things and leave. Don't tell your daughter." The room went silent. Dead silent. Even the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to pause, as if time itself was holding its breath. I could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears, could feel the blood draining from my face the same way it had drained from his. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I managed to stammer, though I'd heard him perfectly well the first time. "Pack your things and leave immediately," he repeated, his hands trembling as he set down his toolbox. "And whatever you do, don't tell your daughter you're going." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to smile and tell me it was some kind of joke. But his face remained grave, his eyes filled with a kind of desperate urgency that made my stomach clench with dread. "I don't understand," I said, my voice coming out small and confused. "What's wrong? What did you find down there?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before in my 73 years of life. It was the look of a man who'd stumbled across something so terrible, so fundamentally wrong, that it had shaken his faith in everything he thought he knew about the world. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I've been doing this work for 30 years. I've seen every kind of plumbing problem you can imagine. Burst pipes, gas leaks, sewage backups, foundation issues. But what's in your basement? That's not plumbing." My knees went weak. I had to grab onto the door frame to keep from falling as the implications of his words sank in like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples of terror through my entire being. "What do you mean, that's not plumbing?" I whispered. Frank closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, I could see that whatever he'd found down there had changed him, aged him, marked him in ways that would probably never heal. "I need you to trust me," he said. "I need you to pack a bag with your important documents, some clothes, and whatever money you have in the house. And I need you to do it right now, before your daughter comes home." But I couldn't just trust him. I couldn't just accept that something was terribly wrong in my own house, in the space where I'd raised my child, where I'd built my life. Even with the fear clawing at my throat like a living thing, even with every instinct screaming that this man was telling me the truth, I had to see for myself. "I'm going down there," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Ma'am, please don't," Frank pleaded. "You don't want to see what's down there. Trust me on this." But I was already moving toward the basement door, driven by a desperate need to understand what had turned this kind man's face the color of ash. He followed me reluctantly, his flashlight beam wavering in his unsteady hands as we descended those familiar stairs that suddenly felt foreign and threatening. The basement looked normal at first glance. The same concrete floor I'd walked across 1,000 times. The same exposed ceiling beams where Sarah and I used to hang Christmas lights when she was little. The same musty smell of old houses settling into themselves. But as Frank's flashlight beam swept across the far corner, I saw something that shouldn't have been there. It was mechanical, complex, and completely out of place in a residential basement. Clear plastic tubes snaked across the floor like transparent serpents, connecting a series of containers filled with liquids that glowed with an unnatural chemical brightness. Digital timers blinked with red numbers that counted down to God only knew what. Pumps hummed with quiet efficiency, moving those unknown substances through a network of tubes that disappeared into the walls. "What is that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. Frank's flashlight beam followed the tubes as they wound their way across the ceiling, through carefully drilled holes, toward the upper floors of my house. His voice was hollow when he answered, like an echo from the bottom of a well. "It's a chemical dispersal system. Those tubes, they're connected to your heating vents. Whatever's in those containers has been pumped through your house for weeks, maybe months. Straight into your bedroom while you sleep." The world tilted on its axis. The basement floor felt like it was moving beneath my feet, and I had to grab onto Frank's arm to keep from falling. My mind raced through the past few months, cataloging symptoms I dismissed as normal signs of aging. The headaches that had been getting worse. The fatigue that left me sleeping 12 hours a night and still feeling exhausted. The memory lapses that I'd attributed to stress and loneliness. "Who has access to this basement?" Frank asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I couldn't speak. The words were there, but they wouldn't come out. They sat in my throat like stones, choking me with their terrible implications. "Mrs. Morrison," Frank said gently, "who is the key to this basement?" "Only." I started, then stopped, then tried again. "Only my daughter." Saying those words out loud was like driving a knife into my own heart. They hung in the air between us, impossible to take back, impossible to deny. Frank nodded slowly, sadly, like a doctor confirming a terminal diagnosis. Suddenly, everything made horrible sense. The new lock on the basement door. Sarah's insistence on choosing the plumber. Her constant attention to my health, bringing me tea and soup and medicine for my headaches. The way she watched me sometimes, with a patience that I'd mistaken for love, but now recognized as something else entirely. She'd been waiting. Watching. Measuring my decline like a scientist monitoring an experiment. The renovation, I whispered, remembering how she'd spent those first few days after moving and making trips to the basement with shopping bags and cardboard boxes. She said she was just organizing things down here. Frank's flashlight illuminated more of the setup. There were charts on the walls, handwritten notes tracking dosages and times, observations about my behavior and physical condition. It was all there in Sarah's careful handwriting, a clinical record of her mother's slow poisoning. "How long?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Based on the equipment and the amount of solution that's been used, I'd say at least 2 months. Maybe longer. 2 months. 2 months of being slowly, methodically poisoned by the person I loved most in the world. 2 months of thinking my daughter was taking care of me when she was actually killing me. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I couldn't process it all at once. It crashed over me in waves, each one more crushing than the last. I sank down onto the bottom step of the basement stairs and began to cry. Not the gentle tears of sadness or frustration, but the kind of deep, body-shaking sobs that come from a place of profound loss. I was grieving for my daughter, for the person I thought she was, for the relationship I thought we had. I was mourning the death of my trust, my faith in family, my belief that love was stronger than greed. Frank knelt beside me, his work-roughened hand gentle on my shoulder. "Ma'am, I know this is hard, but we have to get you out of here. If she comes home and finds us down here." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. We both knew that Sarah had gone too far to turn back now. She'd invested too much time, too much effort, too much of herself in this plan to let it fail because of a plumber's unwanted discovery. "How do you stop calling someone your child after 40 years? I asked him through my tears. "How do you stop loving someone just because they're trying to kill you?" Frank's eyes filled with understanding and something that might have been remembered pain. "You don't stop loving them," he said quietly. "You just learn to love yourself more." His words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that I mattered too. I'd spent so many years being a mother, being a caregiver, being someone who existed primarily in relation to other people, that I'd lost track of my own worth. "We have to go," Frank said urgently. "Right now. Before she gets home." I nodded and wiped my face with the back of my hand. He was right. Whatever Sarah's reasons, whatever desperation or greed had driven her to this point, I couldn't help her by letting her succeed. I couldn't save her by dying for her. We climbed those basement stairs for what I hoped would be the last time, and I locked the door behind us with hands that shook so badly I could barely turn the key. Frank waited while I gathered a few essential items: my purse, my identification, the small amount of cash I kept in my jewelry box for emergencies. I grabbed a change of clothes and my prescription medications, moving through my own house like a stranger, seeing familiar objects as if for the first time. Everything looked different now, tainted by the knowledge of what had been happening beneath my feet. The kitchen where Sarah had made me countless cups of tea. The living room where we'd watched television together, where she'd massaged my temples when I complained of headaches. The dining room where we'd shared quiet meals, where she'd listened to me talk about my day, my memories, my hopes for our future together. All of it had been a lie. An elaborate performance designed to keep me calm and compliant while she slowly stole my life away. I was stuffing my important documents into a small overnight bag when I heard the sound that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Sarah's car in the driveway. Her keys jingling as she approached the front door. Her voice calling out, cheerful and loving, the same voice that had comforted me through nightmares and celebrated my birthdays, and told me she loved me every single day. "Mom? I'm home. How did everything go with the plumber?" Frank grabbed my arm and steered me toward the back door, but it was too late. Sarah's footsteps were already in the hallway, moving in our direction. I could hear her humming softly to herself, probably pleased that her plan was proceeding on schedule. "Mom," she called again, and there was something different in her voice now. A note of suspicion, perhaps, or concern that her routine was being disrupted. I forced myself to smile, to arrange my features into the same trusting expression I'd worn for months while she poisoned me. When she appeared in the kitchen doorway, I was standing casually by the counter with my purse over my shoulder, as if I'd just been preparing to run a few errands. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, amazed at how normal my voice sounded. Frank just finished fixing the faucet. I was about to run to the grocery store. Sarah's eyes moved from me to Frank to the overnight bag in my hand, and I saw her expression change in subtle ways. The smile remained, but it became more brittle, more calculated. Her gaze sharpened, focusing on details, looking for signs that her secret had been discovered. "What's in the bag, Mom?" she asked, her voice still pleasant but with an underlying tension that made my skin crawl. "Just some returns for the department store," I lied, clutching the bag tighter. "Things that don't fit properly." Frank cleared his throat and began gathering his tools with deliberate slowness, giving me time to maintain the charade. "All finished here, Mrs. Morrison. That faucet shouldn't give you any more trouble." Sarah watched him with the intensity of a predator studying prey, and I realized with a chill that she was trying to determine how much he knew, how much of a threat he represented to her plans. The sweet, loving daughter I'd raised was nowhere to be found in those calculating eyes. "Thank you so much," Sarah said to Frank, but her smile never reached her eyes. "I hope my mother wasn't any trouble." "No trouble at all," Frank replied, shouldering his toolbox. "You folks have a nice day." He moved toward the front door, and I followed, my heart hammering so hard I was sure Sarah could hear it. Every step felt like walking through quicksand, each movement slow and deliberate and potentially fatal if I made the wrong choice. "Mom," Sarah said as I reached for the door handle, "you're acting strange. Are you feeling all right?" I turned back to look at her, this person who had grown inside my body, who had been my greatest joy and my most important accomplishment. She was studying my face with professional interest, probably noting my pallor, my trembling hands, the fear I was trying so hard to hide. "I'm fine, honey," I said. "Just tired. Maybe I'll take a nap when I get back from the store." A nap. The irony wasn't lost on me. How many times had she encouraged me to rest, to sleep, to let her take care of everything while I recuperated from mysterious ailments that never seemed to improve? How many times had I drifted off to sleep thinking how lucky I was to have such a caring daughter? "Drive carefully," Sarah said, and there was something in her tone that sounded almost like a warning. Frank and I walked to our cars in silence, both of us aware that Sarah was watching from the window. I could feel her eyes on my back like a physical weight, analyzing my every movement for signs of deception. When I reached my car, Frank leaned close and whispered urgently in my ear, "Follow me to the police station. Don't go anywhere else. Don't stop for anything. And whatever you do, don't come back here alone." I nodded and got into my car with trembling hands, fumbling with the keys as I tried to start the engine. Through the windshield, I could see Sarah standing in the doorway, still watching, still smiling that terrible smile that I now realized had never been real. As I backed out of the driveway of the house where I'd raised my child, where I'd built my life, where I'd nearly died at the hands of my own flesh and blood, I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, though that was certainly shattered beyond repair. Something deeper. Some fundamental faith in the goodness of the world, in the reliability of love, in the basic assumption that the people we trust most won't be the ones who destroy us. Frank led me to a small cafe on the other side of town, far enough from my house that Sarah wouldn't think to look for me there. We sat in a corner booth, our coffee growing cold as he explained what he'd found in more detail, what it meant, what we needed to do next. "The equipment down there is sophisticated," he said, keeping his voice low. "Professional grade. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. She's been planning this for months, maybe longer." I stared out the window at the normal world going about its normal business. People walking their dogs, mothers pushing strollers, teenagers laughing at something on their phones. All of them living in a universe where daughters don't murder their mothers, where home is a place of safety, where the people who say they love you actually mean it. "Why?" I whispered. "I don't understand why she would do this to me." Frank was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of personal experience. "I had a sister once," he said. "Sweet girl, or so I thought. When my father was dying, she convinced him to change his will, to leave everything to her because I was too irresponsible to handle the inheritance. I ignored the signs, made excuses for her behavior, told myself that family doesn't betray family." He paused to take a sip of his coffee, his hands steady now that we were away from the immediate danger. "After the funeral, I found out she'd been stealing from him for years. Credit cards, bank accounts, even his social security checks. She'd been slowly bleeding him dry while I thought she was taking care of him." "What happened to her?" "Prison," Frank said simply. 5 years for elder abuse and fraud. But the worst part wasn't losing my father's money or even losing my faith in her. The worst part was realizing that all those times I'd praised her for being such a devoted daughter, she was actually planning how to destroy him. His story hit me like a punch to the stomach because it was too similar to my own. How many times had I bragged to friends about how lucky I was to have Sarah back home, taking care of me? How many times had I told people what a wonderful, attentive daughter she was? "We have to call the police," Frank said. "But first, we need evidence. What's in that basement won't be enough on its own. We need to prove intent, show a pattern of behavior." My phone buzzed with a text message. "Sarah. Mom, where are you? You've been gone for hours. You're starting to worry me." I showed the message to Frank, who frowned. "She's fishing. Trying to figure out what you know." Another text came through almost immediately. "Your car isn't at the grocery store. I'm getting scared. Please call me." And then another. "Mom, please. You're acting so strange today. Did that plumber say something to upset you?" Frank reached across the table and gently took my phone from my hands. "She's tracking your location," he said, examining the device. "See this app here? It's been monitoring your movements." I felt another wave of violation wash over me. Not only had Sarah been poisoning me, she'd been watching my every move, tracking me like a laboratory animal. Every trip to the doctor, every visit to friends, every mundane errand had been cataloged and monitored. "How long has she been watching me?" I asked. Frank scrolled through the app's history. "Looks like about 4 months. Right around the time she moved back in." For months. This had been planned from the very beginning. Sarah hadn't come home heartbroken and needing shelter. She'd come home to execute a plan she'd probably been developing for years. The divorce, the financial problems, the need for a place to stay, it had all been calculated to get her close to me, to gain my trust, to have unfettered access to my house and my life. Frank turned off the phone's location services and handed it back to me. "From now on, we assume she knows where you are unless we take specific steps to hide your location." "She knows where I am right now?" "Probably. Which means we need to move." We gathered our things and left the cafe, Frank insisting that I follow him to the police station immediately. But as we walked to our cars, I saw something that made my blood freeze in my veins. Sarah's car, parked across the street. She was sitting behind the wheel, talking on her phone, but her eyes were fixed on us with laser-like intensity. When she saw that I'd spotted her, she smiled and waved, the same cheerful gesture she'd used to greet me every morning for the past 3 months. "Frank," I whispered, grabbing his arm. He followed my gaze and immediately understood the situation. "Get in your car and drive straight to the police station," he said urgently. "Don't stop for anything. I'll be right behind you." But it was too late. Sarah had already started her engine and was pulling into traffic, positioning herself to follow us wherever we went. She wasn't even trying to be subtle about it anymore. The pretense was over. She knew that we knew, and she was past the point of caring about maintaining her cover. "She's going to follow me," I said, panic rising in my throat like bile. "Then we lead her exactly where we want her to go," Frank replied grimly. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I drove through the suburban streets of my hometown, checking my rearview mirror constantly, watching Sarah maintain a steady distance behind me. She wasn't trying to catch up or force me off the road. She was just following, watching, waiting for her opportunity. When we pulled into the police station parking lot, Sarah drove past without slowing down, but I saw her eyes meet mine through the windshield. There was no love there anymore, no pretense of filial affection. Just cold calculation and something that might have been regret, not for what she'd done, but for getting caught. Inside the police station, Frank and I told our story to Detective Maria Santos, a patient woman in her 40s who listened without interruption as we described what we'd found in my basement. She took notes, asked clarifying questions, and arranged for a crime scene team to examine the evidence. "We'll need you to stay somewhere safe while we investigate," Detective Santos told me. "Do you have family or friends you can stay with?" I almost laughed at the bitter irony. My only family had just tried to kill me. My closest friends were either dead or living in nursing homes. At 73, I was essentially alone in the world except for the kindness of a plumber who'd stumbled across my daughter's murder plot by accident. "She can stay with my family," Frank offered. "My wife and I have a guest room, and it's only temporary until this gets sorted out." I wanted to refuse, to maintain some dignity, to not become a charity case for a stranger who'd already done more for me than my own blood. But Detective Santos was already nodding approvingly, and I realized I didn't have many options. "That would be very kind," I said, my voice small and defeated. That evening, sitting in Frank DeLuca's guest bedroom, surrounded by the photos and mementos of a happy family I didn't know, I finally allowed myself to fully process what had happened. My daughter, the baby I'd nursed through fevers, the toddler I'd taught to tie her shoes, the young woman I'd helped through her first heartbreak, had been slowly killing me for months. The crime scene team had confirmed Frank's assessment. The basement contained a sophisticated chemical dispersal system designed to gradually introduce toxic substances into my living space. Sarah had been poisoning me with a combination of heavy metals and industrial solvents that would have eventually caused organ failure. The process was slow enough to appear natural, gradual enough to avoid suspicion, and carefully calibrated to my age and weight. Detective Santos called to give me updates as the investigation progressed. They'd arrested Sarah at her office the next morning, finding her calm and composed, as if she'd been expecting them. She didn't deny the charges or claim innocence. She simply asked for a lawyer and refused to say anything else. "What I don't understand," I said to Detective Santos during one of our conversations, "is why she would do this. I was planning to leave her everything anyway. She didn't need to kill me to get my money." According to her bank records, she had significant debts, the detective explained. Credit cards, student loans, some kind of business investment that went bad. She was probably looking at bankruptcy within 6 months. But I would have helped her if she'd just asked. "Some people can't ask for help," Detective Santos said gently. "And some people would rather take what they want than accept what's offered freely." The trial was a media sensation, one of those stories that captures public attention because it violates such fundamental assumptions about family loyalty. "Daughter accused of slowly poisoning mother," screamed the headlines. "Basement of horrors reveals murder plot." I sat in the courtroom every day, watching Sarah at the defendant's table, searching her face for some sign of remorse, some indication that the person I'd loved was still somewhere inside the stranger who'd tried to kill me. But she remained impassive throughout the proceedings, showing emotion only when the prosecutor described the physical effects of the chemicals she'd been feeding me. The worst part was listening to the experts explain exactly what those toxins had been doing to my body. The memory loss, the fatigue, the headaches, the gradual cognitive decline, all of it had been caused by my daughter's careful administration of industrial poisons. I'd been dying by degrees, and I'd been grateful to her for taking such good care of me while it happened. Frank testified about finding the equipment in my basement, describing the sophisticated nature of the setup, the careful monitoring and adjustment of dosages, the clinical notes tracking my deterioration. He spoke calmly and factually, but I could see the pain in his eyes as he recounted that terrible discovery. "In my 30 years as a plumber," he told the jury, "I've never seen anything like what was in Mrs. Morrison's basement. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of poor judgment. This was a carefully planned, methodically executed attempt at murder." When they called me to testify, I could barely look at Sarah. Standing in that witness box, describing the months of loving care that had actually been attempted murder, I felt like I was testifying at my own funeral. Every kindness she'd shown me, every gesture of filial devotion, had been part of an elaborate plan to steal my life. "She was such a good daughter," I told the jury, my voice breaking. "I used to brag to my friends about how lucky I was to have her taking care of me. I thought I was blessed." The prosecutor asked me if I wanted to make a victim impact statement to tell the court how Sarah's actions had affected me. I declined. What could I say that would capture the devastation of discovering that your child, the person you love most in the world, has been systematically destroying you? How do you explain the feeling of looking back at months of shared meals and conversations and realizing that every moment had been a lie? The jury convicted Sarah on all counts: attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, and a dozen other charges related to her systematic poisoning of her own mother. The judge sentenced her to 25 years to life, which meant she'd be eligible for parole when she was 68 years old. I was 73 when she tried to kill me. If she serves her minimum sentence, I'll be dead of natural causes long before she's released. During the sentencing hearing, the judge asked Sarah if she had anything to say to the court, any statement of remorse or explanation for her actions. She stood slowly, looked directly at me for the first time since her arrest, and spoke in a voice that was steady and clear and completely devoid of emotion. "I'm sorry I got caught," she said. "I'm sorry the plan didn't work. But I'm not sorry I tried." Those were the last words my daughter ever spoke to me. I sold the house, of course. I couldn't live in a place where someone had tried to murder me, especially when that someone was my own child. The realtor suggested I not mention the recent unpleasantness to potential buyers, but I insisted on full disclosure. Whoever bought my house deserved to know its history. A young couple with 2 small children eventually purchased it for significantly less than its market value. They weren't bothered by what had happened there, and they promised to gut the basement completely, removing any trace of the equipment Sarah had installed. I moved to a small apartment near the ocean, close enough to hear the waves at night, but far enough from my old life that I could pretend to be someone else, someone whose daughter hadn't tried to kill her for insurance money and inheritance. Frank and his wife, Maria, remained my friends through the whole ordeal. They invited me for holidays, included me in family gatherings, and never once made me feel like a burden or an object of pity. Frank refused any payment for what he'd done, insisting that any decent person would have acted the same way. "You saved my life," I told him once. "I can never repay that." "You don't need to repay it," he replied. "You just need to live it." So I'm trying to do that. Live my life, I mean. It's not easy at 74, starting over with no family and only a handful of friends, knowing that the person who should have been my greatest supporter was actually my would-be killer. Some days I feel ancient, worn down by the weight of betrayal and loss. Other days I feel strangely young, like I've been given a second chance at existence. I've learned things about myself that I never knew before. I'm stronger than I thought I was. I'm more resilient than anyone has a right to be at my age. And I'm capable of forgiveness, even for the unforgivable, though that forgiveness doesn't extend to reconciliation or trust. I still love Sarah. That's the hardest part to admit, the most difficult truth to live with. You can't just stop loving someone because they try to kill you, especially when that someone is your child. Love doesn't work that way. It's not a faucet you can turn off when the water becomes poisonous. But I've learned to love myself more than I love her, which is something I should have figured out decades ago. I don't visit her in prison. I don't write letters or send money or maintain any contact whatsoever. She made her choice when she decided my life was worth less than my bank account, and I've made mine by choosing to value the time I have left over the relationship that nearly destroyed me. Sometimes, lying in my new bed in my new apartment, listening to the ocean instead of the dripping that almost became the soundtrack to my murder, I think about the randomness of survival. If Frank hadn't been the plumber Sarah called, if he'd been less observant or more naive, if he'd simply fixed the faucet and left without checking the basement, I'd be dead now. My death would have been attributed to natural causes. Sarah would have inherited everything, and no one would have ever known that she'd killed me. The thought doesn't make me angry anymore, just profoundly sad. Sad for the daughter I thought I had, sad for the woman I might have been if I'd never had children, sad for all the trust that died in that basement along with Sarah's elaborate murder plot. but I'm alive. Despite everything, despite the months of slow poisoning and systematic betrayal, despite having my faith in family destroyed by the person who should have protected it, I'm still here. Still breathing, still thinking, still capable of finding small moments of joy in ocean sunsets and friendly conversations, and the simple pleasure of waking up each morning knowing that no one is trying to kill me. And that has to be enough. It has to be enough because it's all I have, and it's more than Sarah intended for me to have. I left the house my daughter grew up in because it stopped being home the moment I discovered what she'd been doing in the basement. Home is supposed to be a place of safety, of love, of unconditional acceptance. It's not supposed to be a place where your own child slowly feeds you poison while telling you how much she cares about you. My new apartment is small and simple and completely mine. No hidden equipment, no secret monitoring, no elaborate plans for my demise. Just me and my books and my ocean view and the precious knowledge that I survived something that should have killed me. Sometimes people ask me how I can trust anyone now, how I can let people into my life after what my own daughter did to me. The truth is, it's easier than you might think. Strangers don't have 40 years of emotional investment to corrupt their judgment. Friends don't stand to inherit my possessions when I die. The people I've met since leaving my old life behind care about me for who I am, not what I'm worth. Kindness from a stranger can feel more like family than blood ever did. Frank proved that when he risked his own safety to save my life. Maria proved it when she opened her home to a frightened old woman with nowhere else to go. My new neighbors prove it every day when they check on me without wanting anything in return. I've learned that family isn't always about shared DNA or legal obligations. Sometimes it's about people who show up when you need them most, who choose to care about you when they don't have to, who see you as worthy of protection even when your own blood relatives see you as an obstacle to overcome. If I could go back and change things, would I? Would I choose not to have children, knowing now what the cost might be? The answer is complicated, layered with grief and regret and stubborn, inexplicable love. I wouldn't change having Sarah, because for the first 39 years of her life, she was exactly the daughter I dreamed of having. I wouldn't change raising her, teaching her, loving her with a fierce devotion that only mothers understand. Those years were real, and they mattered, and they can't be erased by what came after. But I would change trusting her so completely that I ignored every warning sign, every small indication that something was wrong. I would change prioritizing her comfort over my own safety, her needs over my own well-being. I would change being so grateful for her attention that I never questioned why she was suddenly so interested in my health and welfare. Most of all, I would change the assumption that blood relationships are inherently sacred, that family members deserve infinite chances and unconditional forgiveness regardless of how they treat you. That assumption almost killed me, and it kills other people every day. Elderly parents abused by their children, spouses murdered by their partners, children destroyed by their own families. Love should make you stronger, not more vulnerable. Care should build you up, not tear you down. Family should be your safe place, not your greatest danger. If you're watching this and something feels wrong in your own life, if someone who claims to love you is making you feel worse instead of better, trust that feeling. Don't make excuses for people just because you share blood or history or legal obligations. Don't sacrifice your safety for someone else's comfort, no matter how much you love them. And if someone tries to warn you about danger, especially danger from someone you trust completely, listen to them. Really listen. I almost dismissed Frank's warning because I couldn't imagine that my own daughter would want to hurt me. My inability to conceive of Sarah's betrayal nearly cost me everything. Sometimes the people we raise grow into strangers. Sometimes the faces we love most wear the cruelest masks. Sometimes survival means choosing yourself over the person you thought you knew best in the world. These are hard truths, painful truths, truths that no parent wants to accept about their child. But they're also necessary truths, because acknowledging them might save your life the way Frank's warning saved mine. I'm 74 years old now, and I'm finally learning to put myself first. It's a lesson I should have learned decades ago, but better late than never. Better to discover your own worth at the end of your life than to die never knowing you had any value beyond what you could provide for others. My daughter tried to kill me for money, but she gave me something more valuable than anything in my will, the knowledge that I'm worth saving, worth protecting, worth fighting for. Even if I have to be the one doing the fighting. So that's my story. That's what I found in my basement, what I learned about my daughter, what I discovered about myself when faced with the ultimate betrayal. It's not a happy story, but it's a true one, and maybe that's enough. Maybe survival is enough. Maybe choosing life over love, safety over sentiment, reality over the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about family, maybe those choices are enough to build a new life on, even at 74. I hope so, because it's all I have left. Would you have believed the plumber or your own daughter? Think carefully before you answer, because your life might depend on getting it right.